We're a little late getting started, but we'll make up for that. The request for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions today? Seeing none, we'll move on. Our first hearing is on Senate Bill 209, and its restrictions on third-party solicitations to registered voters to file an application for advanced voter ballot. And we do have a staff briefing. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Senate Bill 209 amends just one statute, 25-1122, which governs applications for an advanced voting ballot. The amendment appears on page 4 of the bill, would add a new subsection K to the statute. This subsection would require any person who is mailing to a registered voter a mailing that solicits the voter to apply for an advanced voting ballot has to follow the labeling requirements in that subsection K. Those requirements include a clear and conspicuous label on the exterior of the mailing that's in 14-point font or larger, that clearly identifies the individual or organization that caused the mailer to be sent. The mailer cannot have any state or municipal seal or logo on it anywhere or on any document contained in the mailing. And if there's an envelope in the mailing for sending an application for advanced voting ballot back, then that envelope has to have the return address for either the Secretary of State or the county election office for the county in which the registered voter resides. So those requirements would be applicable. The bill would go into effect on July 1st if it was enacted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, so say that again, where that label would have to be affixed on the actual advanced ballot application.
So the label identifying the sender would have to be on the outside on the mailing envelope that it comes in, so that when the voter goes to the mailbox and takes the envelope out, they see a clear label identifying the sender of that mailing.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so Jason, if this application came from another state or other area, how would we then get that information to them that they would have to do that of what this legislation is saying?
Well, it's state law, and the onus is on an individual to comply with state election law if they're conducting any activities related to elections in the state of Kansas. I will point out, though, that there are no penalty provisions in this bill for any person who violates, who fails to comply with this subsection.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. Our proponent is Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome.
I think the revisor did a good job of explaining this. The reason for this is because probably like you, I was inundated with constituents who called because they were getting 4 and 5 of these advanced ballot applications, many from out of state. I realized that the parties do send these out, and so we didn't want to put restrictions on that. We just wanted to clearly identify who these advanced ballots requests were coming from so that voters wouldn't be confused. Somebody may have already sent in a request for an advanced ballot, and then they get something else in the mail, and it confuses them as to whether their request for an advanced ballot was actually received. So we thought these 3 items, first identifying the person who's sending it, second making sure there was no logo that was deceiving, and third make sure that the return address sent it to the proper election office would help clear up any of that confusion. And that is the primary reason for this, just to try to make it very clear to the voters where these ballots were coming from, and they can choose to discard them, ignore them, or whatever, because then they would know they were not an official state ballot. Aside from that, the only thing I would suggest, that my original idea that didn't get into the amendment to the subsection K was potentially saying that any logo similar to a state seal or a county seal, so that there was no deception. That would be just a suggestion for the committee to consider. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions, committee? Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really, really appreciate this legislation. I actually have 5 of them at home. Right now, I saved them, and I like to vote at the polls, actually, so I did not request an advance ballot or application to get an advance ballot, and they were certainly confusing, and a lot of my constituents shared the same concerns. Actually, the Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, came to my district for a voting registration event, and a lot of those individuals brought those applications to him, and he said, hey, let me have one, and he just tore it in half, said, you know, but it was certainly confusing. Mr. Chairman, Senator, would you be opposed to adding, so usually my seniors in my district, when they do receive their vote by mail ballot, and they mail it back, a lot of times they forget to put their signature on the outside of that envelope. Would you be opposed to adding a piece where we clearly label where that signature goes on that envelope when they're returning them?
I wouldn't be opposed to anything we can do to clarify the whole process, and I would leave that to the will of the committee, but I think that's something you guys can certainly undertake, I believe, and I wouldn't see that as an unfriendly amendment to this.
Senator Fausto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So previously, individuals would request, they would do that themselves. And in Cedric County, I know now we just, you know, they'll mail out that application to whereas you can then mail it back to request your advance ballot. Some people have actually been confused thinking that they had already voted when they did that. And so this legislation certainly helps clear that up. Thank you so much for bringing it.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the application mailers that were sent out last year, would any of those be not in compliance with our new proposal here?
If this passes, I would have to see, because there are a number of different variations, but this would certainly create a uniform standard for anything coming from either out of state or within state to comply with for the next election. So I would suspect from what I understand in talking to some of my constituents, they didn't know where some of this stuff was from. And then they had to, or it was in very, very fine print. This would make it much easier for them to identify where these third-party solicitations are coming from.
So are you concerned, is your basic concern that there is something fraudulent going on here with voting?
Mike, no, not so much that, other than the fact that the constituents felt there was. The constituents were worried because they were getting so many of these, and they were confused why. And it made them doubt the underlying system. And we certainly want to clear that up. We want to make sure they understand that, you know, they have the right to request an advance ballot. And these ballot requests coming from other locations would be a valid request if they forwarded it to them. But I think the fact they were getting floods of these things was very confusing to them. And I think that's the intent of this, is to clear up the confusion. I would even suggest making them a different color from whatever the state, you know, not that they would be invalidated, that somebody could use those requests from a party, from any party, and they would be a valid request. But I want it to be clear, this is not from your official county, you call the county, you make a request. It's not officially from them, not that it's not usable, but I think it would help to clear up some of the confusion in what we saw in the elections this year.
One more, if you don't mind. So, I mean, obviously, transparency is a good idea across the board in any situation. What about Secretary Schwab's concern that this is a bigger issue than it might appear on the surface? You know, he'd be the guy who might know about the intricacies. He's suggesting perhaps an interim committee. Should we wait and really dig into this?
Secretary Schwab came before our committee in Transparency and Ethics a few weeks back, and we asked some of these questions. And I asked some of these questions as well. What can we do? And some of the answers we got in that committee would suggest this was at least a good first step. I have concerns that there probably are some more things we need to do. I'm just trying to take a little bite at the apple, one thing at a time.
Senator Thompson, we do want to let everybody know that's on the committee that we do have Katie Copel online, and she will answer questions here in just a few minutes with those questions. So are there any other questions? I have Senator Hildebrand, and then you two. We'll get you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much a question, but more of a comment. I support Senate Bill 209 wholeheartedly. I heard from a lot of county clerks or county election officials that were inundated with phone calls from concerned constituents, mad at them. Why are you sending me another mail-in ballot? I've already received mine. I've already turned mine in. What do I do? Did you lose my original mail-in ballot? Is this why I'm receiving so many? And there was a lot of confusion between constituents and even local election officials. And I think anything we can do to clear up any confusion is a step in the right direction. So thank you.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am in support of this. I received in my district some that had wrong return address on the application. One was Missouri, one was North Carolina. That was definitely confusing to people. When they called and talked to Secretary of State, he told them to tear them up and throw them away. But I think this will really help with that issue on the confusion.
And it might help with the caseload at the Secretary of State's office too, hopefully, with some uniform application of this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'd made reference to these sources that are sending these into the state. So I'm just curious, does this go far enough to identify? There's been talk about identity theft, trying to get information like that. And I think anything we can do to clear up and safeguard is good. Just wondering, what we can do in that regards, identifying these sources.
That's a good question, and I think your concerns are valid, with the identity theft. I don't know that this bill particularly addresses that. But I would certainly leave it to the will of the committee. And like I say, the intent of this is to make it very clear and transparent to voters where these things are coming from. And that's the very simple intent of this bill. If the committee would like to expand it further and have that discussion, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that. I think the more discussion, the better in something like this.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, we'll move on to our neutral testimony. And on remote, we have R.J. Wilson from the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officers.
Good morning, Mr.
Chairman.
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to confer today on Senate Bill 209. Again, my name is R.J. Wilson. I represent the County Clerks and Election Officials Association in Kansas. Our association has 109 members. 105 of those are county clerks, and we have 4 election officials in the most populous counties. And normally we would have one of our county clerks be here with us, but Tuesday morning is when many of our county boards meet. And the county clerk, of course, keeps the minutes of those meetings. And so we we were unable to find somebody to attend today, but I will do my best as a former practitioner to answer your questions. I'm appearing today as a neutral conferee on this bill. We agree with members of the committee. Senator Hildebrand actually expressed that he had spoken to several county election officers, and we received multiple advance ballot applications from voters. Many of those were not the ones that were sent out to the members of the public from the county election office, and we're okay with receiving the applications for wherever they come from, but we were receiving this multiple applications from the same voter. And so what we would have to do is take the time to go and look up the voter record, to look up that advanced application. And if there was different information on the application that we were sent, the most recent application we were sent from whatever party it was sent to us from, we would have to update then the voter record in Elvis to make sure that it matched the latest information we had from the voter. So you can imagine that that created an additional workload for the county election officers. And it took a lot of extra time in an election where there was a great interest because it was a federal election and there was a pandemic, and you now had all of these advance applications coming on top of the county election officer. So that's the problem that we face, and I think your committee and the sponsor of the bill has identified that correctly. We are appearing today to ask for an amendment to this bill, and the reviser may be able to help us with this. We had the same conversation over in the House. We are worried that the word person in the language of the bill is too encompassing, and we would like to request an amendment that makes that something more specific, something that is like exempts governmental officers who are sending out advanced voting applications, because the changes to our envelopes, changes to our process, those are sometimes difficult to work with. So if the intent is not to require the provisions of this bill to impact the county election officer, we would ask then that you either opine as to that this affects or does not affect the county election officer, or specifically exempt us from the provisions of this bill. If your intention is to have the county election officer participate in the provisions of this bill, then we would ask for you to remove the 14-point type language and then allow the Secretary of State's office to act as the intermediary between the legislature and the county election official in propagating rules and regulations through the Rules and Regulations Committee, and allow them to form a consistent approach so we can make sure that we can conform with that. When we start making changes to envelopes or any of our applications, it becomes a serious burden on the county clerks to have to try to comply with that. Consistency is the key for us in elections, and so we would ask that you take a look at that as well. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have today, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions you might have.
Very much. Are there any questions? Senator Palscado.
RJ, thank you, Mr. Chairman. RJ, hi, didn't we serve together in the House Ethics and Elections Committee?
We did, as a matter of fact, Senator.
You look different with the beard goatee. I like it. So that's kind of the statement that you just made was what I was asking Senator Thompson is, so if we are trying to address those out-of-state entities that mail those multiple applications, like to a constituent in my district who she just kept thinking that her application was getting lost in the mail. So she kept mailing them back over and over, and then she was concerned of if her vote was going to count or if she had to vote provisionally. So then how, with your amendments, how do we get the message across to the out-of-state entity? The ones that I received were from Missouri, asking me if I wanted to request an advance ballot application. So how do we get them the message?
Well, I think the bill attempts, Senator Falscado, thank you for the question, first of all, and it was a pleasure to serve with you in the House of Representatives, and I see you've been promoted to the Senate now, so congratulations on that. We, to answer your question, I don't know how specifically. We engage in educational campaigns, and so does the Secretary of State's office. I don't know specifically how we get that message out to voters other than to continually try to educate. But what I will tell you is that if this applies to your county election officer, the person who is actually sending out the official application, and in your county, senator, your election officer sends an advance voting application to every voter. And that happens in multiple counties around the state. And during the pandemic, it happened in more counties. So all we're asking today, Senator, I don't know how to address your question dealing with out-of-state entities, but I would tell you that the law would apply to them. They would have to follow what is in this particular bill. And all we're asking is that we exempt the county election officers from those provisions.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for testifying today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Moving on, the second neutral we have is Davis Hamlet from the Loud Light Civic Action Group. Mr. Hamlet.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Alley, members of the committee. There's a couple points I want to raise. One is that the 2020 election was just incredibly unique. And with that, Kansas did not have a uniform response in how it dealt with the pandemic. So you had some counties sending out mail ballot applications for the primary, not the general. And so a lot of third-party groups stepped in and just did massive mailers into the state because the state didn't have a unified response of knowing that every voter got the option to apply for a mail ballot. And so with this, as we seek a solution to this problem, which I think we all agree that this was a problem that caused voter confusion, I work with a variety of civic engagement groups, spend a lot of time educating people on these mailers. But one of the massive problems we had is that we don't actually have mail ballot tracking, and we have a very outdated infrastructure system in our elections. And we had a huge backlog. And so even a lot of these mailers, first off, every mailer I've seen would have already been in compliance with this law. And it would have actually gone farther. They have disclaimers about how they're not from government agencies. And they included documents about how to look up if you've already applied. The problem is Kansas had a giant backlog of applications. And part of the problem is that Kansas, first off, we don't let anyone be on the permanent advance list, but we don't have any official online mail ballot application process integrated with the voter system. So all of this stuff has to be manually processed county by county, which causes huge backlogs, cause massive confusion. Also, we don't have real mail ballot tracking. When the Secretary of State refers to their mail ballot tracking, what that actually means is that a county clerk had manually entered the data into the Elvis, the statewide base, and then people could look it up. But that's not what mail ballot really is. There is a way, and some counties have adopted methods where it's in real time tracked through the USPS, so you know where your ballot is. And so with all of this, I would just urge that, again, I don't really oppose this bill because I actually don't think that it would do anything or that it would prevent any of the groups that sent mailers from sending mailers, but that you should instead look to real solutions, which are providing more assistance to counties to have adequate staff to process these things, to improve the voter infrastructure up and down the system, and to make it more accessible for people who always want to vote by mail. So that, again, so the county clerks don't have to incur that every single election additional paperwork that creates a backlog. One other issue I want to raise, because I don't believe that the Disability Rights Center was signed up to give testimony, but they raised in a House hearing on a similar bill a concern that they actually send out a packet, and they are the federally designated disability rights group in Kansas. And so whenever someone qualifies for federal disability, they send out a packet, a large packet that includes official government documents that would have official government seals, and it includes the permanent advance mail ballot application for people with disabilities. And so they had a concern, again, that they be exempt or that they have some kind of carve out to make sure that essentially they aren't forced to do separate and duplicative mailers. So before moving forward on this, I'd recommend you reach out to the disability rights group. And the last thing I will mention is a question of how broadly would this apply? And my concern here is, what if someone just sends out a mailer that says, visit your county election office to learn how to apply for a mail ballot or something like that? Would that be under this proposed bill? And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions, and thank you all so much for hearing my testimony.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We have neutral, written, and available for questions. We have Katie Copel from the, she's a District Assistant Secretary of State. And Katie, are you online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Katie?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
We now can see you. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome. Are there, first of all, do you have a statement that you'd like to make concerning what you've heard this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have our written testimony before you. We do think the bill nicely addresses some of the concerns that we all share on the confusion and frustration many Kansas voters experienced the last election on these confusing and duplicate mailings. The one request we do have with the bill is our office does not process advanced by mail ballot applications. So we would recommend that you remove us from the bill. I believe it's line 41, page 4, I believe. I specifically pointed it out in our testimony. That way, that would ensure that voters do not mistakenly return those ballots to our office, and that could unintentionally delay the processing of their ballot applications. But again, we think this bill is very timely. We are happy to work with lawmakers in whatever way you see fit to address this issue, and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Seeing no further testimony on Senate Bill 209, we will close the hearing for 209 and open the hearing for Senate Bill 11. And on Senate Bill 11, Jason, are you available for a briefing on this first?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 11 amends one statute concerning advanced voting ballots. It's 25-1128, which describes conduct as unlawful with respect to advanced voting ballots. The bill on page 2 would add a new subsection H to this statute. And this would make it unlawful to alter the postmark or any other official indication as to the mailing date of an advanced voting ballot with the intention to make it appear as if the mailing date was different from the actual date the advanced voting ballot was mailed. And this would fall under the other offenses in 25-1128. So that violation would be a level 9 non-person felony as provided currently under that statute. The bill will go into effect on July 1st of this year if enacted, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for advisor? Yes, Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, can you just give me an example of altering, I mean, when you helped draft the legislation, was there a situation that occurred to?
I don't know of any specific instance, but this would address, so the advanced voting ballot comes back into the county election office in the envelope, and that envelope has been postmarked as to when it was processed by the U.S. Postal Service. And so anybody who intentionally tries to alter that postmark or in some way modify the exterior of the envelope in some way to make it appear that the ballot was processed, was mailed at a date before it may have actually been mailed, as in, mailed prior to the deadline for mailing such ballots. If you intentionally try to alter that postmark date, then you're have violated this statute and potentially could be convicted of a level 9 felony.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? Seeing none, our first proponent is Senator Hildebrand. Welcome, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable committee members. I introduced this bill just for the mere fact I had a couple of constituents call me or talk to me and say, hey, that I could alter a postmark on an advance ballot and you can't do anything to me. And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. I don't think that's true, but when I got to looking, it was true. So that is why I submitted this bill and stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions, Senator Dietrich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So who would be the person that would notice the alteration? Would it be the election office? Honestly, I haven't worked the election office. I don't know the answer to this.
That would be them or the postmaster or someone at the post office.
Do they check them manually now? I mean, how would they know?
You would have to.
Yeah, it's just kind of a knowing.
You have to physically look and see,
Yeah.
hey, that was altered.
Thank you.
Senator Ware?
So you had a couple of constituents that said this is possible. Were there any indications that there was a case where this actually happened?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will close the hearing on Senate Bill 11 and move to Senate Bill 94, requiring all voting systems for elections to use individual voter verified paper ballots. Just a moment and get your documents out and we will have a staff briefing. Jason, can you give us a briefing on this, please?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 94 would establish a new election law requiring that all voting systems use a individual durable voter verified paper ballot for voting. The paper ballot could be marked by hand or could be marked with a voting machine, provided that the machine is a non-tabulating electromechanical or electronic device that simply marks or prints the paper ballot. And then the ballot must be provided to the voter for inspection and verification before it is actually collected and secured and preserved. And the ballot would be the official ballot and would be preserved for audit and recount purposes after Election Day. The Senate Bill 94 would also require paper ballots to be canvassed by hand or by a vote tabulating equipment, such as an optical scanning equipment. However, if vote tabulating equipment is used, there should be a sample. There must be a sample audit conducted doing a hand count of random sampling of the paper ballots to compare with the results of the vote tabulating equipment. Senate Bill 94 would also prohibit the use of any poll books that do not require a handwritten signature of the voter. Sections 2 through 5 of the bill make some conforming amendments to other election statutes to ensure that the election procedures comply with the Section 1 requirement to use paper ballots. Sections 6 through 9 make conforming amendments regarding electromechanical and electronic voting systems to ensure that those systems comply with Section 1's requirement of use of paper ballots. And finally, sections 10 through 12 of the bill make conforming amendments regarding optical scanning equipment, again, to ensure compliance with that Section 1 general policy requirement. The bill does have a delayed effective date, Mr. Chairman, of January 1st of 2022. So if it is enacted, the provisions will not be effective until that date. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Jason, are there any questions? Senator Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Jason, just tell me what's the main difference between, again, I like to vote in person, that process at the machine there at the polling location. But some people will have to vote provisionally. That's on a paper ballot. And then even when I vote on the machine, there's a little piece of paper in there, like a cash register receipt that's going around. I've always wanted one of those to click out for me to walk away with. But now we insert that card, which we then take to the election poll worker at the end, and they will take it and insert it in another machine, thereby counting my vote, and I get my little sticker. So that's paper. So explain the difference of what this Senate Bill 94 would actually do that's different from if you were there voting by provisional ballot paper already.
My understanding, Senator, is that the Bill 94 would require that there be some durable voter verified paper ballot produced that is then secured and preserved for future recounts and audits in the process. I believe, my understanding is there are voting machines that record votes electronically, and then the ballot is an electronic ballot that is preserved electronically through a data storage system, a media storage device, and then recounts and tabulations are done against those media storage devices, is my understanding. And those types of machines would not be permitted in Kansas under Senate Bill 94. There must be a paper ballot either handed in by the voter or produced by one of the voting machines that the voter can verify their votes with, and then is preserved for recount and audit purposes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Our proponent is Senator Hildebrand. Welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 94. Senate Bill 94 is a bill similar to what I introduced last year or last session. It did have a hearing in elections, but it was not worked. To answer Senator Pascado's question, there are still roughly 8 counties that have an what are called DREs, that record your vote without the paper ballot. So when you go and you do yours at your electronic voting machine and it kicks out that paper ballot that you can verify, that's how I voted. There are still 8, there might be less now because they're working on getting those phased out, but they're still active. Those do not have that, and that's the concern, because once you hit submit, there is no way to verify that is what you picked. And just to add to this, or kind of give you some type of perspective on this, it's not necessarily fraud that you're worried about in this. It's a lot of times computer error, human error, or something like that is a cause for data to be corrupted. And a lot of times when a voter sees that, they automatically assume it might be fraud when it's actually something very innocent that is not verifiable, because once it's in that machine, there's no way to verify it. In my testimony, I listed several links of some news articles talking about DREs, and one of them, and just something to give you food for thought, is I think it's 2018, possibly 2018, the legislature did pass a law that said no new DREs can be purchased. So those will be phased out but we still currently have active DREs. So my goal with this bill is to give the voter the confidence, even in those counties that are using DREs, that their vote is being accurately recorded. So that is my whole goal. In Georgia, there was a federal lawsuit, and I've got a link to that the federal judge, it was brought on by citizens in Georgia, that they found with the citizens that the DREs are not acceptable. So that's something for food for thought. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. At the appropriate time. Are there any, yes, Senator Ware.
Thank you, and thank you. So what, oh, now I lost my rabbit. Oh, check back with me in a minute.
Yes, Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senator Hildebrand, so when could that receipt or paper ballot, or when could that be used? So the major benefit for it, and how could it be used?
For instance, let's say there is a close race and it's decided by one vote. If you have that voter verifiable paper ballot, you can tally that vote with the paper ballot. If you do not have that paper ballot, all you have is what that computer says is in there, is how it tabulated. You know, you have memory sticks, those little memory cards that go from machine to a computer. Those have been proven that, you know, over time, those get lost. And unfortunately, you know, anytime you touch, the more times humans touch something, the more opportunity you have for a mistake to happen. So.
Just a moment, hang on thought. Senator, are there any machines that are connected, hardwired in lieu of the memory stick, the voting machines? Do you know of?
Not to my knowledge, and Katie Koppel will probably be better to answer it, but my understanding is that none, I don't believe any can be. But I could be mistaken, and that's probably a better question for Katie.
Her, Senator Ware.
Thank you. So we're not replacing the machines that we're not as happy with for the voters in those 8 counties? So I guess I'm confused. It sounded at first like you were saying we should replace the machines in those 8 counties.
So in those counties that currently have DREs, they would not be able to use them under this bill as of January 1st, 2022. So that would give them time to implement new machines, because you can't change those machines to where they will print a paper verifiable ballot.
Right, okay. So I guess the natural next step is, who's going to pay for it? Do the counties have to pay for new machines sooner than they would have otherwise, or does the state?
And Katie could probably touch on this a little bit more than I can, but there's HAVA funding. There's other type, which is, I can't remember the acronym, what that acronym stands for, but it's a federal program that they have for voting access, and there's funds always for there, and they have used a lot of those funds, because I think last year, I can't remember the number, but I think it was up to like 12 or something. So they are coming down, but we still have these in election cycles, and every time you have one of these in an election cycle, how much trust can we put in that is a true and accurate account of how it was voted, how the person voted? So, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I follow you correctly? Did you say that after an individual votes, then they can verify that paper ballot?
Correct. So, and Senator Falscadeau gave a pretty good example. So there's a lot of counties that currently have computerized machines. You go in, you sit down, and you push a touch screen of how you want. It's like a ballot on the screen, and you touch it, and then you hit a button, and then it'll print it out. So you can verify on that ballot that's how you voted, and then you can hit submit. Then you take that paper ballot that you just verified, and you take it over to a poll worker, and then they put it in a secure box. So if for some reason there is a problem with the machine malfunctions is the machine breaks down, they've got that paper ballot that they can still count or recount.
Further questions? The acronym I think you were looking for was HAVA, H-A-V-A, Help America Vote Act.
Correct, yes.
And that was
I knew
not
it was
me.
something simple,
That was
but it was
not
too
me that
simple
found
for
that.
my mind.
So, thank you, staff. If there are any further questions, we do have neutral. Thank you. Mr. Davis Hamlet again. Mr. Hamlet?
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Alley, members of the committee. This is a topic that I care deeply about. I worked for many years on that original Kansas audit bill that took about, I think it took us 4 years to get it finally passed. That also included the phase out of DRE machines and the requirement of voter verified paper trails, which are necessary for accurate audits. And they just build a lot more confidence in the election system. So first off, I want to say, I think we should all agree, and I think there's consensus that DREs are bad machines and need to be phased out, and really do need to just be gone. The biggest problem with that is the money, as was mentioned. Whenever we spent years working on this, this was the pushback we got from counties, was that these are very expensive pieces of equipment. Election infrastructure items are usually proprietary. There's limited companies, limited, they have to pass a lot of security protocols. And so for smaller counties, which there's only, I believe, 8 or fewer smaller counties that still have DR, talking about a potentially several $100,000 financial mandate on these counties that under this law would have to be fulfilled within the next 7 months, I believe. So in the midst of the pandemic, they would have to expend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Again, I think the solution here, though, isn't to say, like, don't do it, but y'all might want to consider a funding component. About half a decade ago, I had talked with some counties and encouraged them to use HAVA, but our HAVA money actually ran out, and the federal government has not renewed much of that HAVA funding. And the money that they have renewed is really limited in use, and they can't just use it to buy the ballot recording devices. One of the bigger concerns here that I want to mention, again, I do support that element of it. I do think we need to phase in, which right now the law says you can't buy new machines that are DREs, you can't rent them, you can't lease them. So it's a phase in. And if you are going to expedite that, I recommend some financial aid component for the counties. But the other part that I found and that I am concerned about is the audits, the additional audits that are proposed in this. We do need to expand our audits in Kansas. The version that passed was extremely watered down. I think we need more audits. We need better audits. We need risk limited audits. My concern here is how this bill is written. It says that a random sample of ballots in every precinct will be audited. Now, an audit is where you look at the ballots and you see if it matches a result. You cannot match a random sample of a precinct. If all of the ballots for a machine are separated and stored in an area, you could audit that entire machine. And how the current audits work is a random selection of precincts are audited because the entire precinct gets audited so you can actually match the result. If you are randomly selecting a sample of the ballots in a precinct, what you would have to do is you would have to make a statistical comparison with a margin of error. You would have to say, we only looked at 10% and this is the result of 100%. So we are 90% confident that that would match. And my concern here is that would, I believe, create more distrust in the system, cause massive voter confusion. Because you're not, right now the Secretary of State is able to say, we counted it and the votes exactly matched. Whenever we're going to have a result where it says we counted a chunk of the votes and they were kind of close to matching, I just think that's going to create a lot of problems. So I think the audit component of this really deserves a lot more just a lot more research and intentional thought to this, because I mean, I love the idea, I love the direction, but I right now as written see a lot of problems with implementation. So I just recommend treading very carefully as you explore the audit component of this. And with that, I'm happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Davis, you've become almost an expert at this particular issue, voting rights. I support the legislation. It would prevent fraudulent voting. It would allow people to exercise their right to vote, to make sure that their vote counts. So with that said, you spoke of the logistics somewhat of it. So give us just a precise, easy fix to it to address your concerns you just stated. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you for that question. I'll be honest, one of the things that took this bill, the original audit, years to pass is that statisticians were involved in that, and audits aren't exactly an easy thing. And that's one of the problems that with implementing an audit, this is something that actually I think would be, again, great for an interim committee to explore. I think you really want experts to be involved in this, because if you do it wrong, it can have the opposite impact. I mean, the goal of an audit is to build trust, but if an audit is done wrong, or if it's designed poorly and so has confusing results, it can actually create the opposite. I also didn't even, I apologize that I didn't have enough time to research this bill as thoroughly. I just knew about immediate phase in the equipment, and I realized the audit part at the last minute as I was writing testimony just the other day. So right now I don't have a perfect solution, but I would be happy to look more into audits and try to provide an answer for that via email if appropriate. Thank you.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Davis, thank you for your testimony. You had mentioned the cost of replacing DREs to somewhere around $100,000 or something, but there's nothing in this bill that says you have to replace a DRE with another machine. It just says you have to have a paper ballot, verifiable ballot. Back in not too long ago, there were no electronic machines. You used a paper ballot every time. That wouldn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if they resorted to that, would it?
So this issue gets, again, I hate to say, just say it's complicated. This is something where I think, I'm not sure if the clerks are signed up to speak, but there is under federal law, you have to have certain machines in every precinct, machines to comply with the Disability Rights Act to make sure that people with disabilities can get assistance, which is usually done through some type of voting machine. And so that's where I think there would have to be an expense. Also with, well, yes, you have the paper ballot. That paper ballot has to go through tabulating software and a tabulating machine. So there are additional machine requirements to that. So I agree that there are probably ways that a county could implement this at a cheaper cost. But county by county, I think these would be more appropriate, I think, to discuss it with the 8 counties that would be directly impacted, because they're going to have varying needs and varying compliance concerns.
Any further questions? If not, thank you very much, Davis. And we do have neutral written and available for questions. We have Katie Beck, the Assistant Deputy Secretary of State. Katie?
Hello again, Mr. Chairman. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Well, I've been trying to keep track of some of the questions that were written, and if I missed any of them, it was unintentional. You have our testimony, and I believe a lot of it was has already been discussed. Regarding the HAVA and CARES Act funding, yes, there are limitations as to what the HAVA funds could be used for. In 2020, the federal government passed the CARES Act, and all that money had to be used in 2020 for the elections to directly respond to the COVID pandemic. So all of those funds have been expended. The state, the responsibility of our office is to certify the election equipment, but it is ultimately the responsibility of counties to procure the election equipment they desire to use in their respective jurisdictions. Regarding election machinery, they are not connected to the internet, and many are not even connected to power outlets. We're seeing more and more machines operating on battery rather than through an electrical plug. In terms of the number of counties still operating using DRE machines, Senator Hildebrand is correct. That number has fallen and continues to fall. We are in the final stages of compiling our massive data report from 2020. At the start of 2020, there were approximately 8 counties with DRE machines. However, with the influx of money in large part due to the pandemic, we know that number has decreased, and we should be able to, by March 1st, give you the specific number of counties still with those machines. Again, there is law on the books stating that these machines are cannot be replaced with DRE, similar DRE type equipment. And just the reality is a lot of these DRE machines are already reaching the end of their natural lifestyle. So counties are in the various stages of either procuring, budgeting to procure, or they have purchased the machinery just because the fact is they're old. So I hope I touched base on every single one of the questions asked, and would be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any questions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Katie, for those who are listening in, share with them the acronym of ks.gov.
Oh, DRE, that's Direct Recording Electronic System, so DRE.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Katie, for being online today. So with that, for no further questions, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 94. And tomorrow we have a hearing on working 84. Is that correct? So we will be working Senate Bill 84. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.